Hello and welcome to this week's deep dive. And of course the weather this week has started to turn quite interesting. That's if you compare it to last week, where we did have high pressure, but we were stuck under the anticyclonic gloom. It was dry, settled, but there was plenty of cloud around. This week, however, is totally different, and it's all because of this low pressure. Often at times this week, it is going to bring in some very wet and windy weather, particularly later Wednesday through into Thursday. And if you're keen-eyed or if you've followed us on social media channels, you'll have seen already this morning we have issued a couple of wind warnings and also a rain warning. So let's take a look at the details. So to start off, let's take a look at our winds. We follow this along here. So I'm going to just move this over to midday on Wednesday. Oh, actually Wednesday afternoon, sorry, where actually we can see winds are mostly light. We're not expecting any gusts at this point above 50 miles per hour. And actually Wednesday is probably going to be quite a nice day. It will be dry, bright, sunny, some showers in places, but actually overall a half decent day. And it's really later into the day as we start to see that area of low pressure, which I just had on the screen. It will start to skirt its way across the south. And as it does so, we'll start to see an increase in winds and we'll see an increase in gusts too. So you can already see the main areas that our model is pointing out. So western coast of Wales, parts of the southwest, possibly parts of the south and also the southeast. But note that wind direction. It is a more northerly wind direction. So actually a lot of the gusts across parts of the south are going to be offshore. And as this system drifts its way eastwards, a chance we could see wind speeds, particularly around exposed coasts, of around 50 to 60 miles per hour, which is why we do have a couple of wind warnings in force. I'll get onto those in a moment. But really with that northerly wind, it's going to be across any northerly exposed windward coasts that we're going to see a strengthening of those winds, possibly parts of the southwest as well. And the low pressure system will eventually continue to drift its way eastwards through into Thursday. And with a change in location of that low, then we start to see the strongest of the winds become more confined to eastern areas. Now, once again, the strongest of those gusts are likely to be offshore, but really any exposed coasts, particularly exposed to that northerly wind direction, could possibly see some quite strong gusts in the range of around 50 to 60 miles per hour. The low pressure system will continue to push its way eastwards, but it actually becomes a feature that kind of lingers for a time into the North Sea, and with that we continue to see that northerly wind direction. And you can still see here, even though once again most of the strongest winds are going to be offshore, any exposed coasts once again are going to be catching those gusts. And even inland areas, even though they're not showing the pink modelled colours here, even inland areas are still going to be quite breezy, quite gusty at times on Wednesday and Thursday. But even as we head closer into the weekend, it's still going to be a breezier feel. And also notice once again that wind direction really coming from the north, and that's going to have a knock-on effect in terms of our wind chill temperatures, but we'll come more into that in a moment. So wind speeds are going to start to increase later Wednesday through into Thursday. Not only that, but we're going to see a fair amount of rain associated with this feature as well. So if I go into later tomorrow, this is 6-hour rainfall totals. Our models are really starting to show now where the possible most impacted areas are going to be. So you can see as we head kind of later through into Thursday that it's really that southeastern half of the country there, so central parts of England, parts of Lincolnshire, East Anglia, even parts of the south and southwest are really going to start to see those rainfall totals tot up. So we can see here widely between sort of 20 to 30 millimetres of rain, but once again it's going to be those hilly areas, those more exposed areas where we're going to catch possibly some quite persistent heavier downpours. Most areas are going to see around about an inch of rain. And as that system continues to drift its way eastwards, obviously we'll start to see the more persistent outbreaks of rain become a bit more confined to the east as well. Well, we could still see those totals tot up through into Thursday and through into the early hours of Friday until that low really starts to clear away. So it's going to be windy, it's going to be wet. Initially, through the early hours of Wednesday, it will be quite wet, particularly across the south. And then as that system drifts to the east, things will start to ease away. But we do have some weather warnings in force. And it's, of course, all our warnings are based on impact. So there is a chance, particularly across parts of the southeast, where we could see some windy and wet conditions, obviously a highly populated area, there's a chance we could see some impacts in association with this feature. Now obviously they're not super clear on this, so I'm going to try and draw around them just to make them that little bit easier to clear. But there is a warning mostly across eastern areas, so parts of Lincolnshire, East Anglia, southeast England and also the London area. So this is going to be a wind warning. I'll just wait for that to catch up. And we've also got a second wind warning around western coasts, so western coasts of Wales, also western and northern coasts of Devon and Cornwall. So this is where we've got the wind warnings there. So the initial one across Wales, parts of southwest England, that's going to be valid from 4 AM on Wednesday all the way through until 6 PM the same day. And this secondary wind warning across eastern areas, that's going to be from 9 AM all the way through up till midnight. So wind speeds mainly in the west around 40 to 45 miles per hour, quite widely. Even inland areas could see these kind of wind speeds, but around those coasts they could potentially get up to around 50 to 60 miles per hour. Now across eastern areas, obviously I showed you that low drifting eastwards, those winds, those northerly winds really starting to pick up as it does so. So wind speeds could be slightly higher here. Once again, 45 to 55 miles per hour, possibly 65, just pushing into the mid 60s miles per hour, just as that system drifts across, but that once again going to be around those exposed coastal areas. And we're going to go through in a moment a little bit of model uncertainty. Some models do have that low slightly deeper. The deeper the low, the stronger the winds. And if this takes place, we could potentially be looking at wind speeds of around 65 to 75 miles per hour. So obviously a chance that it could create some impacts. We also have this rain warning issued here. This is across much of the south and southeastern kind of swathe of the UK. So once again, this is where we're expecting possible impacts as a result of persistent rain. So once again, around 20 to 30 millimetres, but where we do see those heavier persistent downpours, a chance we could see between 30 to 50 millimetres of rain. So that's why these warnings have been issued, and like I say, quite a populated area. So a chance we could see some localised flooding, not only this, but quite strong winds at this time of year. Obviously the trees are still quite in full leaf, and with a more northerly direction, those trees are a little bit more exposed. Obviously leaves on railways, that means lots of delays or cancellations in terms of trains. It can create slippery surfaces, and obviously we're looking at some localised flooding too. So do keep an eye on our website for any warning updates in terms of wind and rain over the next couple of days. So obviously I've already discussed why we are starting to see this change. It's all thanks to low pressure. Even this afternoon we've still got low pressure situated to the northwest. That's bringing in plenty of showers across western areas. But it's this area of low pressure that we're keeping an eye on. This is the one associated with the warnings. This is the area of low pressure that will eventually drift its way across the Atlantic. And at times it does get picked up by the jet stream. Now, of course, we have spoken before about areas of low pressure getting picked up by the jet stream. They undergo rapid deepening when they fall into what we call the left jet exit, the colder side of the jet. And this can sometimes undergo quite rapid deepening. We can sometimes get quite rapid cyclogenesis as a result of this. Now, that's not quite what happens with this area of low pressure, and I'm going to try and explain why. So here it is Tuesday afternoon. If we move through into Wednesday, it starts to get picked up by that jet stream and it moves quite quickly closer towards parts of the southwest. Now this is the main jet core, and what you'll notice is that it's actually situated slightly further south than we'd initially expect. Not only this, but you've got this secondary jet streak which is really pushing in from the north, pushing its way downwards and pushing that low across. I'm going to show you that in a slightly different way. This is something which I took from our chief this morning. So there's that main jet core that we were looking at, the low situated around about there. And here's that secondary streak of the jet stream just pushing its way southwards. Not only this, but you've also got some areas of stronger winds just to the north of this main core. You've got one pushing into parts of the southwest. So it's actually a really complicated picture high up in the atmosphere, and that's one of the reasons why we have had some model uncertainty. The models all slightly modelling the jet stream slightly differently, and obviously that has a knock-on effect as to the track, the timing of the low, how deep that area of low pressure is going to be. So that does explain, I think some people mentioned it yesterday, you know, why is there still this uncertainty at such a short lead time? And this is one of the main reasons why the jet stream, the fast flowing ribbon of air high up in the atmosphere, it's not always set that it just moves from west to east. Sometimes we get quite complicated setups, and this in turn does create that uncertainty. So let's head back to our area of low pressure, and what you'll notice is, just jump back, it does start to sit where we would usually undergo some quite rapid deepening, but this low doesn't really start to deepen until actually later Thursday, when it starts to push away from the jet stream and starts to push into the North Sea. So I'm going to attempt to explain why. So here we go, let's just drag this back. Just have to stand in front of the screen for one moment. So here it's not far from the left jet exit, but it would probably need to be slightly shifted further south. And because it's just slightly shifted further north and that this jet stream here is slightly further south than usual, and it stays in that location, and we almost see that low detaching from that jet just a little bit as it starts to push into parts of the southeast. Then it's not until it moves off until it undergoes a little bit more deepening than what it does so as it moves in. So I just want to head back and explain why we tend to look at the left jet exit. Well, I'm going to attempt so because it's a little bit complicated, but I'm going to try and simplify it a little bit. And I'm just going to move over to this side of the screen. So let's say this is our jet stream. Here we go. And I've drawn it on slightly curved, make sure I'm still in the picture. I've drawn it on slightly curved just to kind of show that as that air is moving into the jet stream, it's a little slower. And when we get towards the jet core, this is the center of the jet, those wind speeds really start to pick up. This is where we tend to see the strongest wind speeds. And then we start to see slight spreading out of our jet. The wind speeds start to decelerate. Decelerate? They start to slow down as they move out of that jet stream core. So here is really where we start to see the strongest of the winds. So if this is our wind speeds moving into that jet stream, represented by this arrow, starts to accelerate as it does so. But we also have another force at play here, and this is called ageostrophic motion. Now, ageostrophic motion is essentially a wind it's kind of out of balance between the Coriolis force and the pressure gradient force. I'm not going to go into what those are now. We've talked about it loads of times in different videos. But essentially, it's the difference in the balance between those two forces. So if you imagine a car driving round a bend at a constant speed, it either starts to accelerate or slow down, and then suddenly you have an unbalance of those forces. That's a very simplified way of explaining what ageostrophic motion is. But in terms of this context, what you really need to know is that ageostrophic motion will always move to the left of acceleration. So where we see our winds accelerate, our ageostrophic motion will always drift to the left. So within our jet stream core, if our forces are being pushed to the left, the air is being pushed to the left. So this is where we start to see, with all the air pushing northwards, we start to see more air here, and it starts to sink. We start to get convergence aloft, according to Dine's model. So convergence aloft is when the wind speeds push together and push down. So convergence aloft is here. And because our air is moving northwards, we've got less air now to the south, and with less air, air starts to rise. So this is where we have an area of divergence. So convergence, the air is moving down, the pressure is increasing. Where we have divergence, the air is moving up and the pressure is decreasing. But obviously we usually talk about the left jet exit. That's where we tend to pick up areas of low pressure, where we tend to see rapid deepening. So as the air accelerates into the jet stream, we start to see the fastest wind speeds here. And as it starts to move out of that jet core, our wind speeds start to slow down. And this means, in terms of forces, our acceleration is actually moving this way. So this is where our wind speeds start to speed up, we start to slow down, so the force of acceleration moves this way. And then our pressure gradient force, if we remember, moves to the left. So once again, that air is being pushed to the south, more air being pushed to the south. It's moving downwards, convergence aloft. So we have our area of convergence here. So where the air is moving away from the north, that's where we're needing to find more air to replace that air that's moving away, so it's starting to find it lower down, so we start to see that air begin to rise, and then we get divergence aloft. And it's here where we have divergence, where we get a development area, and this is why we tend to look at the left jet exit if areas of low pressure are being picked up by the jet stream. Not only this, but this towards the north of the jet, that's our cold side of the jet as well. So another trigger really acting to create that divergence aloft, to really lower that pressure even more as that small scale low starts to drift its way across the Atlantic, and really acts to fuel it as it drifts its way across and moves towards us in the UK. So a very simplified example and diagram. Please do take a look at some of our other videos if you want a little bit of information on that. But this is essentially why we tend to look at the left jet exit. So let's take a look at our area of low pressure once again, because like I said, initially it starts to drift across. This is the jet stream that I just attempted to draw here. Starts to move into the left jet exit, but as we get later into Wednesday, through into Thursday, it becomes detached. Nevertheless though, it's still a relatively deep area of low pressure. You can see plenty of isobars on the chart, which is why we are starting to see that increase in winds. Not only this, but it's bringing in plenty of rainfall as well, as usual low pressure systems do. But it's one of the reasons why at this moment in time, it is not a named feature. I'm going to come on to that a bit more in a moment later. That's the reason why we're not naming it, but there's potentially other countries that might name this system. More on that in a moment. But anyway, it's still bringing in some wet and windy weather, but it's not going to be quite as intense. The wind speeds aren't going to be quite as strong. It's not a named feature because it starts to move away from that jet stream. It has less of a trigger in order to deepen. But it does start to deepen as we drift into Thursday. We don't really say goodbye to that low, really even until the weekend. It sits there swirling around into the North Sea, as I showed you on the wind gusts earlier, with that northerly flow. It's still bringing in some quite gusty conditions across eastern areas of the UK, and it kind of sits there. It does start to drift its way eastwards a little bit, starting to move its way away from Denmark, but then we've got high pressure starting to build out to the west, which I'm sure will eventually push it out the way. But on Thursday, it still tends to bring some quite intense winds across the south. So what's another trigger if it's not going to be the jet stream? What's another trigger creating this in order to intensify? Well, that's all thanks to something called positive vorticity advection. Oh, I've lost you. They've switched off. It's got very technical today. I've not got many deep dives left, so I thought I'd take my advantage of getting all technical with you guys. But it's positive vorticity advection, and all because we've got a deep upper trough starting to build into the North Sea. So rather than the jet stream being the trigger for this area of low pressure, it's actually that the deep upper trough building in eastern areas. So we can see this positive vorticity. This is where the area of low pressure sits, just out to the west into the North Sea. We can see it shown by these red and these blue colours. So all along here is Thursday. This is at 6Z, 12Z, and then 18Z. So all through Thursday, here we are. And we can even see it, as I say, it's kind of lingering around out to the west. We can still see that area of low pressure sticking there all the way through into kind of Saturday, really. So why is it the upper trough that's starting to create that, that intensification of the low? We'll start to see that pressure start to drop once again. Obviously, the lower the pressure, the deeper the storm, sorry, and the stronger the winds. Those eastern coasts still picking up those strong gusty winds. And it's all because of this upper trough, and that's because just to the east of troughs, or to the right of troughs, however you look at it, we start to get divergence once again. So we start to get divergence happening aloft. So therefore we've got that wind, we've got the air parcel, sorry, starting to rise. We've got convergence to the west of the trough. We've got divergence to the east. So a similar setup to the jet stream, where we have those convergence areas and those divergence areas. But where we see the divergence areas is to the east of the trough, and that's where the area of low pressure starts to sit. So we've got air rising, once again really intensifying that low and dropping the pressure at the surface. So this area of low pressure is an interesting one because it's kind of starts to slack as it drifts across the south. Then as it pushes into the North Sea, that's when it starts to intensify. And it's also one of the reasons why we're not naming the storm. Obviously, we're also in partnership with Meteor, and we're also in partnership with KMNI, the Danish Met Services, and we're really part of the kind of northern European group who tends to name these storms. So if someone else decides to name it, for example France, Meteor France, because they are going to see some quite strong winds associated with this feature, particularly across their northwestern coasts, then actually it won't be Bram, it will be Benjamin. So there could potentially still be a named storm, but it's unlikely to be named by us. And really, because this system is drifting across the south, it is impacting a few different countries, not with strong winds, but it's also bringing in some quite intense areas of rainfall. So northern parts of Europe are very unsettled at the moment. Intense rain. We've also got some quite intense thunderstorms. I think it was yesterday there was a tornado recorded in France. We've also seen winds so intense that they've knocked cranes over. So they've already had quite a lot of unsettled weather, and as this area of low pressure starts to build through, we're going to see further spells of wet and windy weather. So it could potentially be quite an impactful low, and obviously when we have impactful areas of low pressure, they do tend to get named, or where we see kind of warnings build up from yellows to ambers, we start to think about naming. So a chance that a different country could name the system, but as it stands, Tuesday afternoon, I'm probably jinxing myself and it's being named right now. But the Met Office are very unlikely to name this storm. Now, obviously, if this area of low pressure does then become more intense and some slightly different models start to look like they're more aligning and this area of low pressure is going to be slightly deeper, then we would obviously look at escalating the warnings and then we would look at naming. But that's very, very unlikely. The more likely thing that might happen is that another country may name this system, but we'll take a look at that over the next 24 hours and so and see what happens. But at the moment, it is not a named feature. So obviously this system then starts to drift its way over to the southeast, or over to the east, sorry. And then what starts to happen, let's switch some of these off, we do start to see a rebuild of high pressure once again out to the west. It's not got a H on it just yet, not H for high pressure, not for Honor, but it is high pressure, as we know, because that will move round in a clockwise direction. But we've got high pressure building in the west, and obviously moving in that clockwise direction. We've got low pressure out to the east, moving in the anti-clockwise direction. So then, of course, we start to get that northerly flow of air. So over the weekend, things are going to start to feel that bit chillier. Let's take a look at those temperatures. I'll go a little bit further in time. Let's go from Thursday onwards, let's go from Wednesday. So temperatures at the moment, I mean, they're not that exciting. They're either around about average, or in some places they're a touch above, some places they're a touch below, particularly in the north. But sometimes it's not always the value of what the temperature actually is, it's how it feels. Because obviously last week it felt kind of nice in the sunshine, but under all the cloud it felt quite cool. But I always think this feels quite differently as those winds start to intensify, and it's really that wind chill that starts to bite a little bit. The temperatures at the moment are, like I say, around average. So around 14, 15, might get to kind of 16 degrees Celsius into tomorrow. Wednesday actually looks like quite a nice day. But notice those temperatures starting to drop away as we head through into the weekend, actually looking more like the high single figures, possibly 10, 11 degrees. But actually, it's those wind chill temperatures that are you're really gonna start to feel it. So if we take over to Saturday, even though temperatures, like I just said, 10, 11 degrees, when you add on that chilly northerly flow, particularly across parts of Scotland, I mean, Aberdeen wind chill temperatures looking at about 3 degrees. So it's gonna be feeling much colder as we head towards the weekend. If you're not a fan of the cold weather, well, actually, it's gonna be just a very small blip of chilly weather, and as that high pressure starts to build, we'll begin to see a bit more of a westerly flow and more rain probably, particularly across the northwest, some brighter interludes of ridges. It will be one of those changeable weeks once again as we head into next week. So it's a brief colder spell, and then things will probably get that bit milder, but along with the milder weather, it'll probably be wet. That's all I'm going to say, because obviously it's Alex Burke-Hill on the 10-day trend tomorrow, so I don't want to step on his toes. So for a bit more information on the weather ahead, do check that out tomorrow afternoon with Alex B. But just a heads up for the weekend, it is going to start to turn chilly. So obviously quite unsettled this week, some rain warnings in force, some wind warnings in force. Things will start to settle down over the weekend, though there could be some showers, even some wintry showers across Scotland as things start to turn a bit chillier. Wintry showers mainly across mountainous areas. There's not going to be as much snow as perhaps some media outlets will try and let you believe. But yes, a change is on its way, a brief colder blip before that high pressure starts to build in, perhaps bringing some slightly nicer conditions next week. Obviously, it's the start of half term for many. I know half term, I don't have children, so I have no idea, but I know half term has started this week for some, so it's not been the best start, but particularly this weekend, it will be the start of half term for many of us in the country, and you might be out, I don't know, pumpkin picking or something, getting ready for Halloween. So there's going to be lots of nice weather, but definitely wrap up warm because it is definitely going to be on the chilly side and still quite windy as well. So if you've decided to stick up your Halloween decorations, make sure you've tied them down. So I think that's pretty much everything. No, there was one more thing that I wanted to talk about because quite a few of us quite like our space weather, don't we? Actually, if you take a look at our TikTok, any moment now, by the time this video is issued, there will be a TikTok from Alex B once again about the Orionid meteor shower, which has actually, it's already started. I wrote down the dates because I knew I'd forget, but it's between, oh no, it's starting from now, 22nd of October until the 7th of November. So there'll still be a chance to see it, but tonight it's really going to be its peak, and it's quite good weather conditions if you want to go take a look as well. I believe the peak is from around midnight. Oh, I'm on the wrong day. I was going to say, that looks a lot cloudier than I thought. Here we go. So the peak is going to be from around midnight until 6 a.m. And you can see if we take a look at what the clouds being modelled out, you can see there's quite a lot of clear skies, and eastern areas in particular are going to see quite a few of those clear skies. It's still going to be a little bit breezy, I will admit, particularly across Scotland, around those coastal areas, still quite breezy there. We can see most of us are going to see clear skies. And even this cloud in the west is probably patchy low cloud, so there'll be some breaks at times, possibly some mist and fog, as winds are fairly light in most places. So there might be some mist and fog in places, but particularly between midnight and 6, let's drag that round, there are going to be plenty of clear skies. So if you're a big fan of meteor showers, it's definitely worth going to have a look, because I think we had, it was last week, we had the supermoon, and quite a few people saw that, but we also had the aurora. Because the supermoon was so bright, not many people could actually see the northern lights across parts of Scotland. So if you missed that and we're a bit gutted, well, there might be something else that you can spot tonight. So yes, I'm glad I remembered that one. Of course, if you get any cool pictures, definitely send them into the Met Office. Maybe we can feature them on this week's live, which of course is on Friday at 12:15, like it is every week. And this week it's me and Alex Burke here, and it's actually the last time I'm going to be on the screen answering questions. So if you have any questions for me specifically, make sure to tune in this Friday, and it's also going to be the last quiz that Alex Burke here will be able to give me, so fingers crossed for a 5 out of 5. But yes, if you do have any questions or comments, particularly about anything that I've gone through this afternoon, make sure to leave them in the comments box and I'll take a look at them and try and answer some of them during the live. And of course, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe. If you liked this video, do please give it a thumbs up. I've not got many of these deep dives left. We've got a double whammy of deep dives with me, I'm afraid. I'm also going to be on the one next week, so if you have any questions, maybe I can take a look at them too if I don't get the chance to answer them on Friday. But otherwise, I hope you enjoyed. As I say, if you want a bit more in-depth weather on the next 10 days or so, you can take a look at Alex Burkhill's video on YouTube later. Otherwise, that's everything from me, so I hope you have a lovely week, and I'll catch you again very soon.